This is furious HOA Karens. The tow driver hesitated and she screamed louder. Take a breath and settle in, because this one gets wild fast. Vanessa waved a tow authorization email on her phone and screamed that the timestamp meant she already won. I do not care what you think you heard, she yelled, jabbing her finger at the screen like it was a weapon. The board has authorized your vehicle for immediate tow, and you have zero recourse. I stood there in the Falcon Point Community Association guest lot with my arms crossed, staring at her. My car sat 10 feet away with a guest pass displayed on the dashboard exactly where it was supposed to be. The pass was valid for another 3 days. I work as a shipping clerk and I keep receipts, signatures, and tracking numbers for everything, so I knew exactly when I had requested that pass and exactly when the office had approved it. Vanessa is the Design Review Board Vice Chair at Falcon Point, which is a planned community in Hillsboro, Oregon, where certain homes get special treatment and everyone knows it. She blocks approvals out of spite and pressures neighbors to sign complaints, then calls it community support. I had been living here for 8 months and I had watched her target 3 other residents over landscaping, paint colors, and driveway repairs. Now she was coming for me. She stepped closer and I could see the tiny body camera clipped to her jacket collar. She wore it to every confrontation and she loved to mention it, like it was proof she was always right. The board will back me because they are afraid of me, she said, her voice dropping into this smug tone that made my skin crawl. I have documentation for everything and you have nothing. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened my email. I have the approval confirmation from the office, I said. It is time-stamped 2 days ago. My guest arrives tomorrow and the pass is valid through Friday. She did not even look at my screen. That pass was never registered in the system, she said. Someone shifted your guest pass on the dashboard and I am documenting that it was never displayed properly. Either way, you are in violation of the fire lane proximity rule and your vehicle will be towed within the hour. She pulled a handheld plate scanner from her bag and thrust it inches from my rear plate, holding the screen away from me so I could not see what she was entering. I stepped around to look, and she turned her whole body to block me. This is official HOA business, she snapped. You do not have access to enforcement tools. The fire lane proximity rule was new. The board had passed it 3 weeks ago, and nobody had received clear guidance on what it actually meant. The painted curb was 15 feet from my car, and I was parked in a designated guest spot, but Vanessa was claiming that any vehicle within 50 feet of a fire lane curb was subject to immediate tow if the board decided it was a safety risk. I stared at the violation letter and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. The letter was dated today, but the approval denial she kept referencing was dated tomorrow. She had pre-written the violation before she even checked my pass status. I am dealing with a strict landlord requirement right now, and my lease has a clause about HOA violations. If the association sends any kind of lien notice or formal violation to my landlord, I could be facing lease termination. Vanessa knew that because she had asked pointed questions about my rental status during a board meeting 2 months ago. My neighbor reported my car was too loud last week, which was ridiculous because I drive a 10-year-old sedan that barely makes any noise. But Vanessa turned that complaint into a parking violation by claiming my vehicle was not properly registered with the guest pass system, even though I had been parking in the same guest spot for months without any issues. A rideshare driver was parked 2 spaces over, waiting for a pickup, and he was rolling his eyes and shaking his head while he watched the whole thing. Vanessa did not care. She turned and walked toward the community center, pulling her phone out and typing something with her thumbs moving fast. I got in my car and checked my email again. The approval confirmation was still there. I screenshotted it, then I opened the Falcon Point resident portal and downloaded every document I could find related to guest parking, fire lane rules, and tow authorizations. My elderly parent was waiting on a ride to a medical appointment, and I could not risk losing my car tonight. I called the management company that handles Falcon Point operations. The receptionist put me through to a compliance coordinator named Derek, who sounded tired before I even finished explaining the situation. He put me on hold for 3 minutes, then came back and said Vanessa had submitted a tow authorization request an hour ago and the board president had approved it. I told him I had the guest pass approval in writing and I could forward it immediately. He sighed and said it did not matter because Vanessa had filed a safety complaint and safety complaints override guest pass approvals. I asked him what the safety complaint was and he said my vehicle was parked in a manner that could impede emergency access. I was parked in a striped guest spot with no vehicles on either side. There was a full lane of clearance between my car and the fire lane curb. I asked Derek how that could possibly impede emergency access, and he said the board had discretion to make that determination. I hung up and called my next-door neighbor Marcus, who had been living at Falcon Point for 6 years and was tired of Vanessa. He answered on the second ring and I explained what was happening. He said he would be right over. Marcus showed up 5 minutes later wearing a jacket and holding his phone. He had dealt with Vanessa twice before. Once over a mailbox placement issue and once over a guest who parked in his driveway for 20 minutes. Both times she had threatened fines and both times Marcus had fought back with documentation and won. "We need to get ahead of this," he said. "If she has already authorized a tow, the truck could show up any minute. You need to move your car off the property and park it on the street until we can get this sorted out." I shook my head. If I move it now, she will claim I was trying to evade enforcement and she will add more violations. I need to stay here and force her to follow the actual process. Marcus looked at the guest pass on my dashboard and then looked at me. "Do you have proof that pass was approved?" I showed him the email confirmation. He nodded and took a screenshot of my screen with his phone. Then he said we needed to go to the office and demand a hearing. Oregon HOA law requires that residents get notice and an opportunity to be heard before any enforcement action that affects property rights, and towing my car definitely qualified. We walked to the community center and found the management office locked. A printed sign on the door said office hours were Monday through Thursday 9 to 4. It was Friday at 5:30. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Derek again. He put it on speaker. Derek answered, and Marcus explained that I had written proof of guest pass approval, and I was requesting an immediate hearing before any tow action. Derek said hearings had to be scheduled at least 72 hours in advance, and the next available slot was the following Wednesday. "That is 6 days from now," Marcus said. "You are going to tow his car tonight and then make him wait 6 days to appeal it? That is not due process." Derek said the tow authorization was already active and the vendor had been notified. If I wanted to contest it, I could file a formal appeal and request reimbursement for tow and storage fees after the hearing. I asked Derek who approved the tow authorization, and he said the board president, a guy named Ron, had signed off on it an hour ago based on Vanessa's safety complaint. I asked if Ron had reviewed my guest pass approval, and Derek said he did not know. Marcus ended the call and looked at me. "We need to document everything right now. Take photos of your car, the guest pass, the parking space, the fire lane curb, and anything else that shows you were parked legally. Then we need to get a lawyer on the phone." I spent the next 10 minutes taking photos from every angle. I shot the guest pass, the plate, the parking space striping, the distance to the fire lane curb, and the empty lane between my car and the curb. I also took a wide shot showing the other guest vehicles parked in the same row, all of them closer to the fire lane than mine. While I was shooting, a tow truck turned into the parking lot. It was a flatbed with amber lights and a company name on the door that I could not read from that distance. The driver parked at the end of the row and got out, holding a clipboard. I walked toward him and he looked up. "Are you the owner of the vehicle in Space 14? "That is me," I said. "Can I see the authorization?" He flipped a page on his clipboard and showed me a printed form with a signature at the bottom. The signature was labeled as Ron, the board president. The form listed my plate number and the violation reason as fire lane safety obstruction. I pulled out my phone and showed him the guest pass approval email. I also showed him the photos of the parking space and the fire lane clearance. He looked at the photos and then looked at my car. He shook his head. "Man, I do not know what to tell you. I just go where they send me. If you have a dispute with the HOA, you need to take that up with them. I am authorized to tow this vehicle, and that is what I am going to do." Marcus stepped up next to me. "If you tow this car without giving him a chance to contest the violation, you are participating in an illegal enforcement action. Oregon law requires notice and an opportunity to be heard. He has proof the violation is false and you are about to take his property anyway." The driver looked at Marcus and then looked at me. He scratched his head. "Look, I do not want to get in the middle of this. But I have a signed authorization and I have to do my job. If you want to stop the tow, you need to get the HOA to cancel the authorization." I called Derek again. He did not answer. I called the board president, Ron, and got voicemail. I left a message explaining that I had proof of guest pass approval and I was requesting an immediate halt to the tow authorization. Then I called the Hillsborough Police non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said it sounded like a civil dispute and the police could not intervene unless there was a criminal act or a threat of violence. She said I could file a report after the fact if I believed the HOA or the tow company had acted illegally, but she could not send an officer to stop a private property tow. The driver walked back to his truck and started lowering the flatbed. I stood next to my car and refused to move. Marcus stood next to me. The driver stopped and looked at us. "Guys, do not make this harder than it has to be. If you interfere with the tow, I will call the police and you will get cited for obstruction." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I am not interfering," I said. "I am documenting an illegal tow. I have proof that this violation is false and I am requesting that you contact the HOA and verify the authorization before you proceed." He looked at the camera and then looked away. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I could not hear the conversation, but it lasted about 2 minutes. When he hung up, he walked back over. I talked to my dispatch. They talked to the HOA contact, some lady named Vanessa. She confirmed the authorization is active, and she said you are in violation of multiple parking rules. They want me to proceed. I asked him if Vanessa mentioned the guest pass approval, and he said she told him the pass was fraudulent. I asked him how a pass could be fraudulent if the management company had sent me a written confirmation, and he said he did not know, and it was not his problem. Marcus pulled out his phone and called someone. I heard him say he needed an attorney consultation right now. It was an emergency. He walked a few feet away and kept talking. The driver started hooking up the flatbed to my car. I kept recording. I repeated on camera that I had proof of approval, that I had requested a hearing, and that the HOA was proceeding with enforcement without due process. If you are enjoying this HOA nightmare, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about neighborhood drama and homeowners association chaos. The driver finished securing my car and raised the flatbed. My vehicle was now suspended in the air, locked onto the truck. He walked to the cab and climbed in. I stood there holding my phone and feeling my pulse hammering in my ears. Marcus came back over. "I got a lawyer who can file an emergency motion on Monday," he said. "But that does not help you right now. The best thing you can do is let them tow it, document everything, and then we fight this in court. If we are right, they will have to pay for the tow, the storage, and possibly damages." I watched the truck pull out of the parking lot with my car on the back. I took photos of the truck, the plate, and the company name. Then I walked back to my unit and sat on the couch, trying to figure out my next move. My parent called 10 minutes later asking where I was. I explained what had happened and said I would figure out another way to get there. I ended up borrowing Marcus's car and making the appointment with 15 minutes to spare. That weekend I compiled everything. I had the guest pass approval email, the photos of the parking space, the video of the tow, and screenshots of the Falcon Point parking rules from the resident portal. I also had the violation letter with the impossible date sequence where the denial was dated after the approval. On Monday morning, I called the lawyer Marcus had referred me to. Her name was Jennifer, and she specialized in HOA disputes. I explained the situation and sent her all the documentation. She reviewed it and called me back an hour later. "This is textbook selective enforcement," she said. "The date discrepancy on the violation letter is a huge red flag. Either someone backdated a document or they pre-wrote the violation before checking your actual past status. Both of those are serious problems. We can file a motion to compel return of your vehicle and request an emergency hearing, but that will take at least a week to get in front of a judge. In the meantime, you are going to have to pay the tow and storage fees or your car stays impounded." I asked her how much the fees would be, and she said probably $600 to $800 depending on how long it took to resolve. I asked if the HOA would have to reimburse me, and she said yes, if we won. But if the board could show that my pass was actually invalid, or that I had violated some other rule, I might be stuck with the fees. I paid the fees and got my car back on Tuesday. The tow yard was 30 minutes away, and the guy at the counter barely looked at me when I handed over my credit card. When I got home, I found a notice taped to my door. It was a hearing summons for Wednesday at 6 p.m. in the community center conference room. The notice said I was being charged with guest parking violations, fire lane obstruction, and failure to comply with enforcement actions. It said I had the right to present evidence and witnesses, but the board would make the final determination and the decision was binding. I called Jennifer and she said she could not attend the hearing because she had a conflict, but she coached me on what to say. "Stick to the facts," she told me. "Show them the approval email. Show them the photos. Ask them to explain the date discrepancy. Do not get emotional, and do not let them bait you into an argument. If they rule against you, we appeal and take it to court." I called Marcus and he said he would be there as a witness. Then I spent Tuesday night printing copies of every piece of evidence and organizing it into a tabbed binder. Wednesday at 5:30 I walked into the community center with my binder and Marcus. The conference room was set up with a long table at the front and rows of chairs facing it. Vanessa was already there, sitting in the front row with her tiny body camera clipped to her jacket. She did not look at me. Ron, the board president, was at the head table with two other board members I recognized from the monthly meetings. Ron was a retired engineer in his 60s who always wore a polo shirt and khakis. He looked uncomfortable. At exactly 6, Ron called the meeting to order. He said this was a hearing to address alleged violations by a resident in Unit 47, and he would give me a chance to present my case after the board reviewed the complaint. Vanessa stood up and walked to the front. She had a folder, and she opened it and started reading. On Friday, November 15th, I observed a vehicle in guest parking space 14 that was in violation of fire lane clearance requirements. I approached the vehicle owner and informed him of the violation. He became argumentative and refused to move the vehicle. I documented the violation and submitted a tow authorization request, which was approved by the board president. The vehicle was towed that evening in accordance with community rules. She sat down. Ron looked at me. "Would you like to respond?" I stood up and walked to the front. I opened my binder and pulled out the guest pass approval email. I handed copies to each board member. "This is the approval confirmation I received from the management company on November 13th. It shows that my guest pass was valid through November 18th. I was parked in a designated guest spot, and I was not blocking the fire lane." I handed out copies of the photos showing the parking space and the fire lane clearance. I also handed out a copy of the violation letter with the date discrepancy circled in red. "This violation letter is dated November 15th, I said, but it references an approval denial dated November 16th. That is impossible. Either this letter was backdated, or it was written before anyone checked my pass status." Ron looked at the letter and frowned. He looked at Vanessa. Can you explain this? Vanessa stood up. That is a clerical error, she said. The denial was processed on the 15th and the system auto-filled the wrong date. The important point is that his pass was never properly registered in the system, and he was parked in a manner that created a safety risk. I pulled out my phone and opened the resident portal. I held it up so the board could see. This is the portal confirmation showing my pass was registered on November 13th at 2:15 p.m. I can send you a screenshot right now. Ron nodded. Please send that to the board email. I sent it. Then I pulled out the video of the tow. I do not have a way to play this here, I said, but I recorded the entire tow interaction. The driver confirmed that Vanessa told him my pass was fraudulent, even though I had shown him the approval email and the photos. I am happy to provide a copy of the video to the board. One of the other board members, a woman named Linda, spoke up. Were you given notice of this violation before the tow? I shook my head. Vanessa confronted me in the parking lot at 5:30 on Friday and told me my car would be towed within the hour. I called the management company and requested a hearing. I was told I had to wait 6 days. The truck showed up 30 minutes later. Linda looked at Ron. That does not sound like proper procedure. Vanessa stood up again. This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive, she said, her voice sharp. The board has the authority to authorize immediate tow for safety violations. This resident was obstructing emergency access, and he refused to comply with enforcement. We followed the rules. Marcus stood up from his chair. Can I speak as a witness? Ron looked at Vanessa, then nodded. Go ahead. Marcus walked to the front. I was there on Friday, and I saw the parking space. There was no obstruction. The vehicle was at least 15 feet from the fire lane curb, and there was a full lane of clearance. I also heard Vanessa tell the tow driver that the guest pass was fraudulent, even after he was shown proof that it was valid. That is not selective enforcement, that is harassment. Vanessa turned to face Marcus. You are not a credible witness, she said. You have a history of filing frivolous complaints against the board. Marcus pulled out his phone. I have been documenting your enforcement actions for 2 years, he said. I have videos of you confronting residents, threatening fines, and pressuring people to sign complaints. This is not the first time you have targeted someone over a minor issue and escalated it into a tow. Ron held up his hand. Let us stay focused on this case. He looked at me. Do you have anything else you want to present? I pulled out the final document in my binder. It was a printed copy of the Oregon Planned Community Act, with the relevant sections highlighted. This law requires that residents receive written notice of violations and an opportunity to be heard before the association takes any action that affects property rights. I was not given written notice. I was not given an opportunity to contest the violation before the tow. The HOA violated my due process rights, and I am requesting that all fees be reimbursed and the violation be removed from my record. Ron looked at the statute. He looked at Vanessa. He looked at Linda and the other board member. Then he said the board would take a 10-minute recess to discuss. I walked back to my seat next to Marcus. He leaned over and whispered, "You did great. They know she screwed up." 10 minutes later, the board came back. Ron cleared his throat. After reviewing the evidence, the board has determined that there were procedural irregularities in this case. We are going to reverse the violation and authorize reimbursement of your tow and storage fees. However, we are also going to require that all residents re-register their guest passes in the new system by the end of the month to avoid future confusion. I nodded. Thank you. Vanessa stood up. This is unacceptable, she said. You are setting a precedent that residents can ignore safety rules and then claim procedural violations to get out of enforcement. This will undermine the entire compliance system. Linda looked at her. Vanessa, we followed the law. If we do not give residents proper notice and a hearing, we open the association up to lawsuits. We are not going to risk that." Vanessa grabbed her folder and walked out of the room. The meeting was over. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got a new notice. This one said I was being charged with excessive noise violations based on complaints from multiple residents. It included a hearing date for the following week and a warning that continued violations could result in fines up to $500 per incident. I had not made any noise. I work day shifts and I am usually home by 6. I do not play loud music and I do not have parties. The notice did not specify what noise I was supposed to have made or when it happened. I called Marcus, and he said he had received a similar notice the same day. So had 2 other residents who had spoken up at board meetings in the past 6 months. It was retaliation. I called Jennifer and explained what was happening. She said we could fight each violation individually, but the better strategy was to go after the pattern. If we could prove that Vanessa was using the enforcement system to harass residents who challenged her, we could get the board to remove her and possibly recover damages. The problem was proving it. We needed something concrete that showed intent. That is when I remembered the body camera. Vanessa wore it to every confrontation, and she had it on during the parking lot incident. If the camera had been recording, it would have captured everything she said, including her claim that the board would back her because they were afraid of her. I called the management company and filed a records request. Oregon Public Records Law applies to HOA documents, and that includes video recordings if they are used for official business. I requested all video recordings made by Vanessa during enforcement actions in the past year. Derek called me back the next day. He said Vanessa had refused to provide the recordings and claimed they were personal property. I told him that if the recordings were made in her capacity as a board member during official enforcement actions, they were association records, and she was required to turn them over. He said he would talk to the board. 3 days later, I got an email from Ron. It said the board had reviewed my request and determined that Vanessa's body camera recordings were not official association records because the camera was personally owned and the recordings were not stored on association servers. The request was denied. I forwarded the email to Jennifer. She called me an hour later. "This is obstruction," she said. "If those recordings exist and they show what you say they show, Vanessa has a legal duty to preserve them. If she deletes them, that is spoliation of evidence, and we can ask a judge to sanction her." She drafted a letter to the board putting them on notice that the recordings were potentially relevant to a legal claim and they needed to be preserved. She also filed a motion in court requesting an order compelling production of the recordings. The hearing on the noise violations was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I showed up with Marcus and 2 other residents who had also received retaliation notices. We all brought evidence showing that we had not committed the alleged violations. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Vanessa presented a stack of complaint forms, all signed by residents I did not recognize. She said the complaints documented a pattern of disruptive behavior and the board had a duty to act. I asked to see the complaint forms. Ron handed them to me. The signatures were illegible, and the dates were all within the same 2-week period. The complaints were generic, saying things like loud music at night or excessive door slamming, with no specific times or details. Marcus stood up. "These complaints are fake," he said. "I have lived here for 6 years, and I have never seen this many complaints filed in such a short period. Someone is manufacturing these to justify retaliation." Vanessa turned to face him. "That is a serious accusation and you have no proof." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I have been tracking enforcement actions for 2 years," he said. "In that time, the association has filed an average of 3 noise complaints per month across the entire community. In the past 2 weeks, you have filed 12 complaints against 4 residents who all challenged you at meetings. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern." Linda, the board member, looked at the complaint forms again. She looked at Ron. "I am not comfortable ruling on this without more information," she said. "These complaints do not have enough detail to support fines. I think we need to investigate further before we take any action." Ron nodded. "I agree. We are going to table this matter until we can verify the complaints." Vanessa stood up. "You are undermining the enforcement system," she said. "If residents know they can challenge every complaint and delay consequences, no one will follow the rules." Ron looked at her. "Vanessa, we have to follow proper procedure. If the complaints are valid, we will act. But we are not going to fine people based on unsigned forms with no details." Vanessa grabbed her things and left. She did not say anything else. The next day I got a call from Jennifer. The judge had granted the motion to compel production of the body camera recordings. Vanessa had 10 days to turn over all recordings from the past year or face contempt charges. A week later, Derek called me. He said Vanessa had resigned from the design review board. He also said the board had received an external complaint about her enforcement practices and they were conducting an audit. I asked what kind of complaint, and he said he could not give me details, but it involved potential misuse of tow authorizations and improper fee assessments. 2 weeks after that, I got a packet in the mail from the management company. It included a refund check for $840, covering the tow fees, storage fees, and an administrative fee I had paid to expedite the guest pass. It also included a letter from Ron explaining that the board had completed an audit and found that Vanessa had been selectively enforcing rules and pressuring residents to sign complaints. The letter said the board was implementing new policies to prevent future abuses. All enforcement actions would now require approval from 2 board members instead of 1. All tow authorizations would require photographic evidence of the violation and written notice to the resident at least 24 hours before the tow, and all hearing procedures would be revised to ensure residents had a fair opportunity to contest violations before any penalties were imposed. I called Marcus and told him. He laughed. "You actually won," he said. "I have never seen anyone take down an HOA board member like that." The audit findings came out a month later. It turned out Vanessa had been forging tow authorization signatures for over a year. She had been using a signature stamp that Ron had given her for design review approvals, and she had been using it to authorize tows without actually getting board approval. The handwriting comparison was obvious once someone looked. The audit also found that Vanessa had been collecting improper late fees tied to notices that were never properly delivered. The HOA was forced to refund a large batch of charges across the neighborhood, totaling over $30,000. At the next board meeting, the residents voted to change the hearing rules so that no resident could be railroaded through a hearing without proper notice and an opportunity to prepare a defense. The new rules required at least 72 hours notice for any hearing, written documentation of all complaints, and the right to have a representative or attorney present. Vanessa's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes as a cautionary example of what not to do. I ran into her one more time, about 6 weeks later, in the grocery store parking lot. She was getting into her car and I was walking toward the entrance. She saw me and stopped. For a second I thought she was going to say something, but she just stared at me with this cold look and got in her car. A few people nearby had their phones out, probably recognizing her from the neighborhood drama. One guy was filming. She pulled out fast and nearly clipped another car. That was the last time I saw her. The thing about HOA disputes is that they are almost never just about the rule. They are about power and control, and who gets to decide what is fair. Vanessa did not care about guest passes or fire lanes. She cared about being able to tell people what to do and having them comply without question. When someone pushed back, she escalated, and when she could not win on the merits, she changed the rules or made up new violations. That works until someone documents it and fights back. The policy clarification that destroyed her favorite tactic was the new tow authorization rule. It required photographic evidence and written notice, which meant she could not just point at a car and claim it was a violation. She had to prove it, and proving it meant creating a paper trail that could be challenged. That paper trail is what saved me and a dozen other residents who had been targeted. If you are dealing with an HOA that plays favorites or uses enforcement as a weapon, document everything. Take photos, keep emails, record conversations if your state allows it, and do not be afraid to ask for a hearing. Most HOA boards do not want legal trouble, and they will back down if you show them they are breaking the law. And if you have an ally like Marcus, someone who has been through it before and knows how the system works, lean on them. You do not have to fight alone. Falcon Point is a quieter place now. The new board is still figuring out how to enforce rules fairly, but at least they are trying. I still see neighbors who were afraid to speak up before, and now they are asking questions at meetings and challenging decisions. That is the thing Vanessa never understood. Fear only works if people stay isolated. Once they start talking to each other and comparing notes, the whole system falls apart. I still keep my work glove in one hand when I am out in the parking lot. It is a habit now, a reminder that I had to fight for something as basic as parking my car in a guest spot. That should not be hard, but it was. And I still have that tiny body camera image in my head, clipped to her jacket collar, recording everything she said. She thought it was proof she was always right. Turns out, it was proof of the opposite. See you next time, and until then, take care of yourself.